Okay, so we have to do that official part first. Okay, so let's get started. All right. Okay, so we are all here to talk about effective routines in the preschool classroom. As I mentioned at the beginning, my name is April Prescott, and I am an educator. I worked mostly in preschool my whole career, so for about the last 17 years. I spent my first 10 years teaching in a program called Connect Society here in Edmonton that provides services to children affected by hearing loss. And after those 10 years, I transitioned into an administrative role at Aboriginal Head Start here in Edmonton. And I was the inclusive education coordinator there for 6 years. And then I have since transitioned and I have become the Alberta education consultant, because during the pandemic, I went to school and I became a mental health therapist. So I'm currently working as a mental health therapist and consultant for a few different places here in Edmonton. And but my heart really lies with the little ones in preschool, and so that's where my passion really lies, is helping teachers with just what I've learned over the last 17 years in the preschool setting, and hopefully bringing some conversation to the room. Again, some of you just joined us, so if you would be so kind as to pop into the chat who you are, where you're coming from, and what your role is, just so we have an idea of who's in the room. Yeah, so that's where I come from. That's my experience. Okay. All right, so today, this is what we're hoping to focus on. So having a bit of an introduction to routines in general, understanding the significance of having good routines in your classroom. What are some of the best practices? So looking at evidence-based research practices, and then determining what it means to have an effective routine. And I have some examples from my experience that I can share with you. We implement routines. What are some of the challenges that we face with routines? And then coming together for Q&A. Now, throughout all of this, I recognize that as you guys introduce yourselves into the chat, including Nadine, a grade 1 teacher in Airdrie, welcome, and Lynn from Elk Island Catholic, and a new pre-K teacher, welcome, Lynn. We also have Lulu from a school in Mexico as the early years instructional coach, welcome. So we also have experts in the chat. So although I've been tasked with providing you with this platform in the means of this hour-long chat with everybody together, I see myself as just the person who kind of organizes the research and the ideas and shares from my experience. But each of you is also going to have experience yourself. So I welcome you to pop into the chat. Also, if there's something that I mentioned that you're like, oh, I have a great idea for this or a resource for this, please just raise your virtual hand, and then I will stop talking and allow you to take the floor, because I do believe in the shared wisdom and knowledge and experience of everybody who's involved. Okay, so what do we mean by routines? So routines are those things that we do on a regular basis that happen frequently. And when we look at preschool, a lot of the day is encompassed by routines, right? So even from how we get off the bus, get into the classroom, get started on something, flowing in and out of the activities within a preschool classroom, those are all shaped by routines. So we have these routines based on the activities that we're doing. And then we have a schedule that kind of overlaps that, right? And so the schedule is deciding who does what and when, right? So depending on the school that you're in, a schedule might already be defined for you, right? So I've worked mostly in the nonprofit sector, but in my time in public schools, I also recognize that often, you know, it might be the principal who's deciding the schedule, and then you kind of have to fit yourself within that. So depending on kind of how your school or your program operates, you might have a little bit more flexibility within your schedule than others. But then within that, it's determining what those routines look like. So for example, on the schedule, you might have an opportunity for gross motor activity and going to the gym. Maybe you're in a public school and you have access to the gym. Well, what are the routines needed for this big, broad concept of gym time? Okay, so that's kind of what we're going to get into the nitty-gritty here today. I'm looking specifically at a typical preschool day. So for those of you who are in kindergarten or grade 1, I just ask you to get creative and expand your mind from what we have here and say, okay, these are the building blocks that also most of the children in my classroom have come from. So they might already have some of this knowledge. So then how am I going to apply this into kindergarten and grade 1? And again, I welcome you to share those ideas here so that we're kind of hitting all of the marks when it comes to early learning and preschool. Okay, so first we need to understand what is significant about having a routine, because I'm sure just as much as there's those of us in this camp of routines are important, there's also the other side of like, you know, why can't we just let the kids kind of decide what happens during the day? As a teacher, I tried to balance both, to be completely honest. So I would have kind of the hours of the day that I had to adhere to, and then what happened within those hours was within my control. So I would often kind of pick opportunities to stand back and see what do my children naturally do, and how do I then develop routines from their natural activities and how they kind of move through the space and the activities versus me always having to prescribe it. Now there's the other side of that of routines involve skills. And so if our children don't have the skills to begin with, then setting up and establishing that routine is going to be extra difficult. So a lot of this is understanding where your children are at developmentally, what you have been asked to do as a teacher to have your children move through in a day, and then balancing those two out to see, okay, what are the routines that I need to have? So within this theoretical model, we understand that routines are significant in a number of different ways. Well, first and foremost, they do have a lot of influence in how children interpret their world. So we look at different opportunities to be social with each other, different opportunities to work within our emotional system, and then our cognitive development are all wrapped into these routines because of the nature of doing those routines involves having feelings. So for example, if we are transitioning from a preferred activity to an unpreferred activity, oftentimes in a preschool classroom, that can cause big feelings. That main big feeling being of like, I don't want to. Okay, so by having these routines, we instantly have this opportunity to work on the emotional system of the child. Okay, routines also provide security and comfort through consistency and predictability. So some of this also comes from my trauma-informed practice around if we provide this foundation of an environment that is safe, and it is safe in all levels, so physical, psychological, emotional, social, all of these areas of our lives where we can try and provide a safe environment, most often though our brains interpret safety as being predictable and consistent. Okay, so having schedules and routines that are pretty similar, if not the same, across our days can help our children learn that this place is safe and predictable and consistent. What we do know is that if we have a brain that is constantly in a stress response that tips us past this point of being calm and alert and ready to learn, then we're not going to be in a place to learn. And so if we're constantly changing up our room, you know, and that sometimes is something that we really like to do as preschool teachers. We love to provide this super fun and engaging environment, but if we change too much too fast, we could actually be doing more harm than good. So it's having this foundation of predictability and consistency, and then within that, providing those subtle changes. And we'll talk a little bit about implementing routines a little bit later down the line, making sure that they're effective and successful, okay? So routines and schedules can also help children understand expectations and reduce challenging and dysregulated behavior. Because if we know what's to come, instead of that kind of anxious leaning forward into the world of like, oh, I don't know what's happening next. Or we have the other side of things where if children don't know what's happening, then they will try and take control of the situation and create what they want to be happening. If we have these routines and schedules in place, children know what to expect. So then they are more able and in a better state to kind of receive what's coming to them as far as teaching, and they're in a better space to learn. These routines and schedules can also help increase engagement by providing the opportunity for choice and agency. Talking about children's agency is something that I am super passionate about, and I sometimes feel like a broken record, especially when it comes to the younger years. I find that within talking about schedules and routines, we can sometimes lean on ourselves too much as the adults in the room, okay? So it is our number one job to provide an environment that is safe in all the different ways that we can provide safety. But then within that, where can we then allow the child to have a voice, a child to have an identity, and to see themselves in the room that they're in? And so within each one of these routines, we're going to talk about where is the opportunity for choice and where is the opportunity for agency for that child. Because within that is also impulse control. And that's a really important skill and developmental piece that kiddos need to develop, and we can do that within routines and schedules. Okay, so children also benefit from relations and environments that are predictable, which includes important caregivers who behave in predictable ways. So even though right now we're kind of talking about the external of pretty much essentially what you could put up on a bulletin board that anybody could walk in and be like, ah, that is the routine for the day, or that is the schedule for the day. There's also this piece that's highly intertwined, is that our behavior needs to be predictable. And so us as the teacher, we also need to have routines that we abide by. So woven within this, and an hour isn't long enough to get into this. So maybe that's an idea for a second session. If we were to make this into somewhat of a series, is what are the routines behaviorally of a teacher that then exhibit to the children that I too am predictable and therefore can elicit that feeling of safety. Because really at the end of the day, that's our main goal here, is if we provide a safe environment, then learning can happen. And if children aren't feeling safe for one reason or another, and if one of them is my behavior because I am changing too much, then I might be causing, again, more challenges or creating more challenges. One example that I'll bring about teacher behavior, and then we'll move on, is when I was doing my trauma-informed training with Dr. Bruce Perry, one of the things that we noticed was that his model is looking at brain development, so from bottom up and then inside out. And then we look at some of the areas around the brainstem where if those parts of our system are not regulated, then anything above that is going to have a really hard time doing its job. So that includes anything that we're really focusing on in school, some of those higher level areas of the brain. And it got me to thinking, because we look a lot at the senses when we're at that lower level of the brain. And so I started to make sure that I smelt the same every day. I know that sounds kind of weird, but and not like heavy perfumes or anything, but like I didn't change my laundry detergent or any kind of like shower products. And if I was wearing any kind of like body spray or perfume or deodorant, like I made sure that it was all the same, so that and the year that I started to do this was a year where I was working in a classroom with kids with lots of different needs, including they didn't have the ability to really communicate effectively with somebody else their needs. And so I wanted them to feel safe. And I also had a child that had vision loss that was so significant that it was unclear whether or not he could discern who we were visually. So between myself and the other adults in the room. So I was like, well, what's the other sense door that we can use other than touch, right? Is smell. So I was like, okay, well, if I'm smelling consistently, then I am, and then if my behavior is also somewhat predictable, then that could be contributing to a feeling of safety, for example. So that's just one of the other ways where you really start to dig deeper into how can I be most effective as a teacher. It can come down to that. Even, you know, take a page out of what's the guy's name that I'm losing him now, but wears the same thing every day, where he wears the black turtleneck and jeans, where that becomes safe and predictable. Okay. So, and I also, this is me putting my therapist hat on, is also within this, it's like, yes, Steve Jobs. Thank you, Nicole, Steve Jobs. So within this, we also have to remind ourselves of like, what is in our control? Okay. Because we've got kids coming at us from all angles, from all walks of life that we have zero control over, but we do have control over our environment. And then even more control over how we show up in the classroom, which is again, a whole other chat. But do I smell the same? Do I look fairly the same? And if I don't look or smell the same, it needs to have meaning behind it. Okay. So again, there's lots of different layers to routines and schedules. This is just our jumping off point. Okay. Relationships and repetition are also highly important when we're talking about routines. Okay, so routines do provide these two ingredients that are necessary for learning. Okay, so we cannot learn without these two elements. Okay, we all know, we're all teachers here, that we learn through having this novel stimulus at first that's also somewhat similar to something that we already know, so that our brain can kind of match those two puzzle pieces together. And then we need to practice that. We need to repeat that until it becomes solid, or it becomes something that we can retrieve from memory really easily. Okay. So when we're looking at planning routines in your classroom and or your schedules, if we have these two pillars of how we look at things moving forward, okay? So how does this routine contribute to relationships in my classroom? And how does this routine how is this routine repeatable? Okay. The thing about both of these things is that we can scale them. We can make them as big as we need them to be. Okay. So if we combine those two things, then most likely we are going to be more effective in our classroom management as a whole, and then having better relationships and better opportunities for learning in our classrooms. So here are some of the benefits of looking at routines through relationship and repetition being those two guideposts. So self-control, okay? So if we are in an environment that we trust and that we feel safe in, we can then take those safe risks and we can kind of bounce ourselves off of each other and off of the environment to learn what is kind of appropriate and acceptable in this environment. And so that kind of funnels down into that area of self-control. And if there's anything I've learned from kindergarten teachers, that's one of the number one things that they wish kids come out of preschool with, is like, do they have this just semblance of can you hold yourself together until I get to you kind of feeling, right? So having a little bit of that self-control. Okay. Power struggles. So I'm going to have less power struggles if a child does not have to constantly try and anticipate what I'm doing next, okay? As a therapist who works mostly with young children and parents, this is one of the biggest things that I see are these power struggles and these dynamics. And if we just improve the predictability of the parent around what is happening next, what does our schedule look like, these types of things, we see that kind of worrisome behavior come down, okay? And also we see that need to control because, oh, the adult's in control, so I don't have to be in control, okay? Safety. So again, teaching, our number one thing that we have to keep in mind is safety. But if we look at safety through relationships, that's how we actually learn how to be safe, is like, oh, again, it comes kind of back down to the self-control one too, of like, can I trust you? Can I bounce things off of you and know that they're going to be received and reciprocated? Okay. Also safety around, you know, friendships. Okay. So those are relationships within a classroom, and are we actively teaching how to be good friends? Okay, these are all skills that we need to build. Okay, so then we have relational safety, we have emotional safety, physical safety. So teaching routines and repetition around like how to even use things. I think about at Aboriginal Head Start, we take kids to gymnastics monthly. So part of that is just learning how to use our bodies in different ways. But every time we go there, the instructors there go over safety for each one of the implements that we use, so that by the end of the year, the kids can even repeat back to us what's safety and what isn't in that environment, even though they're only going once a month. Okay. Again, social skills, we kind of mentioned that already, but having patterned routines within social interaction. So even if you look at a typical schedule where, say, you're in kindergarten or grade 1 and you have a scheduled recess, that's patterned repetitive behavior. Okay, but what's happening during that recess? Like, how many of my kids actually need to develop some form of routine within recess? What skills are missing so that they can have a successful social interaction and relationship at recess? Transitions, we all know that is huge. Again, that could be a whole other talk about just effective transitions in a classroom setting. But these help us actually develop coping skills. Okay, how do I cope with change? Again, as a therapist, that's one of the main things that I work through with adults. And it starts very early on as to how are we teaching children how to navigate changing from one thing to the other. Okay. And then learning. Okay. So building self-confidence, curiosity, social skills, self-control, communication skills, and more, all through focusing on relationships and repetition. Okay. So these are two things that you can use as reflection points during your planning as you get ready for this upcoming school year. Okay. So I chose this picture just to kind of highlight that even in this, you know, it looks to me a little bit like a corner of a very typical preschool classroom. And I invite you just to pop into the chat and let me know just at first glance, what do you notice in this picture that speaks to any of the routines that might be happening in that classroom? And I'll give you a moment to type in your thoughts. Okay. Okay, Stephanie notices the yes, no board. So that can be around that choice and agency piece. Okay, what we are allowed to do, what we are not allowed to do. And that can be in that, you know, you're adding those parameters of maybe time or space or resources, but then within that, the child has agency. It could be a meeting space or a circle time. Yeah, absolutely. So some of the things, that's kind of what I thought I saw too, was I could see this as kind of being a bit of that teacher directed backdrop, so to speak, of the circle time, where if I turn around, I've got my tricky words, I've got, you know, my alphabet board here. So I might be focusing on some literacy components within that circle time environment. Jocelyn mentions sing or say the alphabet. Absolutely. Lynn mentions feelings. Okay. I also noticed that there's some elements around seasons here. So there's lots of things. So even in just this one literally stock photo that I found on the internet, you know, we're each kind of pulling out different routines that we see that can be embedded in what's relatively a small space. Okay, so I think that this is an important reminder that you can pack a lot of information into small spaces in the classroom without it being, you know, too overwhelming and without it being distracting from the learning environment. Okay, because I think we could all agree that this is pretty typical looking classroom. Okay. Oh, Stephanie, you know what? That's a great comment. So Stephanie just mentioned that she was looking for a visual routine and misunderstood the question. Yes, in that, so a visual schedule can help us identify routines, and then also we can have those visuals that work within routines, and I have some examples in here for you from some of my past classrooms. But absolutely, like I think we could all imagine here where we might place a visual schedule to maybe guide what's happening in this corner of the classroom. So that's a great point, Stephanie. Yes, cues for sure. So Routines involve the teaching of skills to complete some form of task to get from point A to point B. And sometimes we use visual cues like, pictures, graphics, dots, things like this to help children understand what steps are necessary to complete something. So just within this picture, we don't necessarily see that, but we do see that there might be pieces where the teacher might have explained some form of a routine. So for example, the little magnetic letters on the board, that's something that I would use as a transition routine of if I had, say, a kindergarten circle and, when I call your name, come up and choose the letter that I tell you and put it in the cup, and then you can go play. Okay, so that builds a routine within the tools that are there. Okay. Yes, familiar items can cue the activity, absolutely. And that's actually a really good tool from like a neuroscience perspective of, the way that our brains make meaning is that we take whatever that novel stimulus that we're being presented with, and we attach it to the next closest thing that we've learned before, okay? And then we connect those two things, and then we kind of create this chain of learning. So when you're looking at building effective routines in your classroom, making it familiar to something that they might already know, or then building some form of visual or physical representation in their mind of what you're asking them to do, can be really helpful. So I like to use cleaning up as an example, because cleaning up is this very broad term, and I mention it again later on, but if we just say clean up, that means something different to every single person. Okay, I don't know what your house looks like. I don't know what you've been expected to do up until now. Everybody's version of clean is different. Okay, so breaking it down into its component parts of like, put the blocks on the shelf, and then the shelf has a picture of the blocks that are supposed to be there. But I also might take one of those blocks and be like, oh, it's time to put the blocks away. And if I'm holding that block while I'm saying it, and then maybe I have a timer of, we're going to take 3 minutes to put the blocks away. See how all of those connect? Those are all of those cues that you're mentioning to make that routine understandable and then more effective. Okay, so here's some best practices from the research around establishing routines in an early learning classroom. So we're looking at developmentally appropriate practice, which we want to remember. Developmentally appropriate is not age appropriate. They are not the same, okay? So if your children are having a rough day, they are going to be developmentally younger, and therefore our expectations of them need to align with their developmental level. But right now we're talking about a very typical kind of ages, 3 to 4, maybe some 5-year-olds mixed in there, of what can we expect of them developmentally on a pretty good day, okay? So we're looking at creating this community of learners by having these routines to help guide them through their learning, okay? So the relationships that we're working on are helping construct that understanding about the world, in that everything is a relationship, either with someone or something, okay? So these routines are built on those relationships, and they help foster them at the same time. We're developing responsibility and regulation so that children learn to respect both themselves and others. We look at this physical environment that we have, these kind of 4 walls and a roof that we have to teach in, where that daily schedule that you were looking for on the wall exists. And that daily schedule exists to foster this learning through play-based opportunities, okay? And then we also have the concepts of space and time and stimulation. So all 3 of those things are taken into consideration so that we have a really good understanding of how much we're asking of the children in the resources that we have, okay? So what are these components that we're talking about that make up effective routines, okay? So throughout the rest of this presentation, I'm going to present to you some of the examples that I have from my past classrooms. And I hope that they give you some examples of what we're talking about when we're looking at effective routines. I've also broken this section of the presentation into the basic building blocks of a schedule for preschool. So I hope that you'll see that these will overlap, okay? So the first routines that we're looking at are arrivals and greetings, okay? So we're helping the children start off the day right. One of the main ways that I include some level of academic learning in this is name recognition. So coming in and either tracing your name on the table, finding your name tag, things like that. And it also helps establish belonging. And belonging is very, very important to human minds. And so how do we come together after being apart for however long we've been apart for and reestablish this community? So in this picture, you'll see this was one of my classrooms at Connect Society. This was my EA Brenda at the time. So behind her, you can kind of see some elements of a routine. So on the whiteboard behind her, I had my calendar, which I didn't focus so much on like days of the week and stuff, but it was more so at a glance the kids could see in a month, and then we can anticipate special events coming up, things like that. I had my visual schedule along the left-hand side of the board. Along the bottom, I did a bunch of counting, and so those were some of the ways that I did transitions. At the back behind them on the blackboard, I use Color Monster as one of my main social emotional tools. If you're not aware, Color Monster is a book. Each monster is a different color for exhibiting a different feeling. So I would do a feelings check-in when children would arrive. So the little strips you see are their names. So they would come over and let me know how they're feeling, and they would put it on the Color Monster. They could also then move their name around if their feelings changed throughout the day. So those are some examples of some of the routine things that you see behind here. But then also on arrival, this was a planting activity that we had. So for each one of my classrooms, I like to have something regulating for the kids to do once they've kind of come in, you know, they've hung up their backpack, all of those things. Those are also all routines that need to be in this, you know, part of the day. How do I enter the classroom? Where do I put my boots? Where do I put my coat? Where do I put my backpack? I think sometimes we forget that these things are not innate, you know, and again, these kids are coming either from daycare or day homes or homes where each of those routines are different, or there isn't a routine, you know, maybe they come in and everything gets tossed and they move on with their day, right? So these are all pieces of the school day that need to be taught. And at the end of this, I'll share a resource that I found, and I'll share a link to my Google Drive so you guys have access to it that lists, it's like a 6-page document of every single little tiny routine that you could think of in a preschool setting, that if you know, make it a point to directly teach each one of those, you're going to have a lot more success. Okay. Okay, so here's an example of a morning routine. It's very, very short and simple, but I just interested to hear your thoughts on what you would add or change to this routine.
This is what I do when I get to school. When I get to school, I have some things I need to do to get ready for the day. First, I walk to the classroom. I do not run so that I stay safe. I open my backpack and take out my folder. I put my folder in the bin. I flip my card with my name on it so that the teacher knows I am here. Then I zip up my backpack and put it on the hook. If I am wearing a jacket, I hang it up too. Now I am ready for the day.
Okay, so pretty simple routine there. Interested to hear in the chat what you noticed. What were the parts of the routine there that helped this kiddo get ready for school? What would you change or add? Yeah, Stephanie, that's exactly what I found. The going in and back out again, I would probably change that, because I could see like that was just with one kid. What if you have, you know, 25 kids in your classrooms? Yeah, not very efficient. You're right. And so this is why, and this is just one, again, one very simple example, but when we start to be reflective and analyze how we have our environment set up, how we have our routines set up, what might work best for us as a teacher might not actually work best for the kids. It might not be efficient. It might not be safe. Like I could see that becoming unsafe if you've got one of those, you know, a bowling ball kid elbowing his way in there to turn their cart around, okay? So yeah, just a simple example of how a morning routine can go. And already we're noticing some of the things that we might change in order to make it better, okay? Nadine would add a regulating routine. It'd be nice to greet the students. Maybe the teacher did later. Right. And we don't, obviously we don't have evidence of what else was happening here. But yeah, some way of regulating when we enter into the classroom and giving us an opportunity to check in with our kids on the way in the door. Okay. So that's arrival. And again, like I said, we could probably have a separate lecture on each one of these. So we're just going to briefly go through them, but I'm sure the wheels are turning and you each have your own examples too of how these things work. So then we have circle time, which again is a very traditional piece of most preschools, kindergartens, even sometimes into grade 1. So it's often a structured teaching time, but it can have a variety of functions. I know at Aboriginal Head Start, we use the circle time for a lot of things, especially because communicating in a circle is also very important culturally. Having a morning meeting is a good way to start the day. And so at that morning meeting, what are the things that you want to communicate to, again, get the kids ready in a good way? So that might be checking in with your calendar, checking in on the weather, checking your visual schedule, also like who's here and how is everybody feeling before we kind of get rolling into the day. Multiple shorter circles can help with regulation and attention spans versus having, a couple big long circles. Again, you're going to be the best judge of that in your classroom, and your kids are going to help you determine that as well. Circle time can also help teach other classroom routines. So again, this document that I'll share with you has all of these lists of these examples of routines that need to be taught, because they're not necessarily, your kids aren't coming in automatically knowing this information. So how do you then teach or take that and make it into a teachable moment? And circle time is often one of those great places to have that. This was from one of my classrooms. So I filled in as a teacher a few times at Head Start. So in the background, again, you can see my easel where I have my calendar. I have the books that we're reading. Again, you can see Color Monster there. Behind and under the school bus, that's my visual schedule. I had a very, very big, like each one of those visuals was 8x10 that year. I've got my special helpers on our Cookum tree. We've got the kiddos identified on the bus. And so we have our own buses at Aboriginal Head Start. So a lot of bus safety and bus routines is something that we go over often. And then within this circle, we're doing a round dance. So we would often end our days with a round dance. So this could have been, an end of the day transitional circle to getting ready for dismissal, where we join together and dance around the circle at the end of the day. Okay. Continuing on with circle time and having a morning message and a song. So a morning message can be a question or a concept that can help cover learning objectives too. So when we're looking at, particularly when we're adhering to a certain curriculum, that we have these benchmarks that we want to hit, I find that like using a morning message can kind of be that North Star that will direct the rest of the day. And it can also help check in with the children. It's also a really great way to incorporate literacy and numeracy in this very kind of small snippet in your classroom, okay? Using music, of course, is always a great learning tool, but having particularly a morning song can help the children know that the day is starting, and it can also help with regulation. So especially if you're incorporating, listening and or singing to music is regulating in and of itself, but then when you add movement, if you add instruments, excuse me, these are all elements that can add that regulation piece to that morning circle and routine. Okay, and then obviously we're going to continue to adapt these routines and these concepts, especially something like a morning message, so that we meet all of our learners and all of their needs. Again, referencing the picture. So this was our welcome song that we sang in Cree. Again, we're sitting around the circle, the carpet in the circle time. Behind the kiddos, you can see the drums that we use often in Aboriginal Head Start. At our morning circle at Aboriginal Head Start, we also do smudge every day, which is also a very regulating practice where we pass the smudge around the circle. Each child gets an opportunity to smudge themselves and pray, and then we pray together to start our day off in a good way. So yeah, just another example of how circle time can be used to convey those messages. One of the other components of a typical preschool day are centers and activity time routines. So looking at rotating your centers for hands-on learning and exploration. So within that, remember we have our two pillars of relationship and repetition. So I find often that people want to change up their centers in their classroom because they are bored with them, instead of finding a way to extend it or add to an existing center in order to facilitate the children's learning and build on what they already know. Remember, that's kind of how our brains work, is we're building on something that we already knew. So I always like to just be reflective about, why am I changing this center out? What is it about it? Is it serving my needs, or is it serving the kids' needs? Okay. And then making sure within that we always have those hands-on learning experiences and opportunities to explore. This is also a really good time to bring in that choice and agency that we talked about when it comes to effective implementation. Okay. Having a balance of both teacher-directed and then child-directed centers, so that we do have that development of that self-control, again, that agency and choice, but then also we're still there to teach. So are we having those opportunities to directly teach skills and knowledge? So within this picture, again, this is one of my classrooms at Connect Society. You can see that at the one horseshoe table here, we have a teacher-directed coloring activity going on, but there's also opportunities for freedom, and that there's just one big paid piece of paper. We've got some Lego toys, Duplo toys on the carpet for another play area. Over here we had the sand table, but there was other elements in there. It wasn't sand, so it was more, I think this was like a car, kind of cause effect car opportunity. And then at the other horseshoe table here, we can see they have the Play-Doh out. Okay, you can see evidence of some of our open-ended art on the wall over here. So lots of opportunities to rotate through these centers and learn different things, and either be playing on my own or with my peers, or with the support of an adult. Okay, so repeat centers foster that learning and skill development. So that's that repetition pillar that we're talking about. And then instead of fully swapping out a center, try changing just one element or adding something in order to make it, you know, a little bit more challenging, or stretch it a little bit more than what it was before. Okay. Okay, here's just another activity or another example. This is from one of my classrooms at Aboriginal Head Start. And I can't remember why the chairs were tipped over. They were playing some kind of game. But here at this table, we've got a literacy component. So you can see that we've got some books here and some letters. So matching some letters to books that we see. In the middle circle table, we've got some easel work going on. So again, changing the level of the work that we're doing at. It was obviously March, so we had our little leprechaun house center over here. So that's our dramatic play. And then also leading into April at Head Start, we talk about the Aegis, which is the frog. So you can see that on the bulletin board in the back. You can see in the very back corner, a little girl on her hands and knees. So working at different levels too, right? So we need to make sure that our centers and activities operate at different levels for kids so that they can explore with their whole bodies and get away from just kind of a sit at a tabletop or a stand at a table, or a sand tray table, for example. Okay, so just some more examples of how those can look in the classroom. Okay, this is a video that I made for Aboriginal Head Start. So one of our cultural liaisons, Felice Gladue, comes in and she teaches us Métis teachings. And so she just has a wonderful way of incorporating all of these things into centers and activities. And these are all built within these activities are those routines where when she comes in, the children become familiar with the tools that she brings. So she brings a lot of things that are similar, and then every visit she'll bring one or two things that are new. She'll have a first initial teaching circle where she will go through each of the materials that she's brought, teaching the children what's appropriate with that material, and then we get the opportunity to rotate through centers. Okay, so here's an example of that. Okay, so again, just a little quick 1-minute video, but I hope you can see within that, like each one of those were centers, and then within that would have been a routine that was built in, starting off with teacher directed, and then kind of peeling back that scaffolding to allow the children to explore these elements of their culture on their own. Okay, moving on to snack and meal times. This can be a really big area for preschoolers in that, again, we don't have control over how meal times look at home. And so then they often come into our school environments with these, you know, different expectations, beliefs, values around food. So that's number one, is that all of this should be have cultural considerations, okay? But within those routines, we're encouraging healthy eating habits. We're looking at the social interactions. So we're sitting together, we're eating together. It's often an opportunity for children to visit and chat about things that they want to talk about. It's much less teacher directed. We can learn things like manners and sharing, opportunities to learn first this, then that, so that, you know, that life has a sequence, and first we often do one thing and then we do another. Using a tool, a visual tool like a placemat, can help with structuring these elements of what we have in the classroom, and just helping define both the physical space for the kids and then what is what the expectations are around meal times and routines around snack time. Okay, here's just another example of a different type of placemat that we've used. This is one of our teachers working one-on-one with a little kiddo, where we have some pacing dots at the bottom. So pacing dots are a really great visual where they sound exactly what they like what they are, where you point to each dot and each dot then represents a word, right? So I want juice, please. Okay, so that's something that our SLPs have introduced to Head Start, and then we include that in our visuals that we use at meal times. Okay. Cleanup routines. Okay, so again, I had mentioned this earlier on, that cleanup is this very broad term that we really have to get better at breaking into its component parts. Okay, cleanup in general teaches organization, responsibility, ability to transition, being accountable for the things in the room. Okay, understanding what language or visuals might make this job a little bit easier. Looking at storage, using photos and labels, using some form of a song in order to represent this activity called cleaning up. Okay, this is a skill that needs to be learned, and the way we clean up each individual activity is also something that might have to be taught to certain kiddos in your classroom. Okay, so how we clean up from Play-Doh table might look different from how we clean up from Lego, might look different than how we clean up from painting, than from meal times. Okay, so I use this photo, although we've got one of my little cuties here at the front working on a little bit of matching here. But if you look in the back, this is an example of an attempt at getting my classroom organized. And these are, those are those kind of cardboard boxes that you can get from IKEA. And I was trying to find really cost-effective ways, and also they fit really nicely in that existing shelf. But as you can see, the lids don't fit on quite well, right? It just kind of looks messy and disorganized. And if it looks messy and disorganized to the kids, then the result is probably going to be messy and disorganized. Okay, so I think the next year I had changed this whole system to include bins that were much sturdier, that everything fit inside, so that when you looked, it was one kind of seamless piece of bins. And then I had a picture on the outside of the bin of what was inside the bin. Okay, so just the importance of being organized so that the children understand that cleaning up means taking this thing and putting it probably in this container and putting it on a shelf. That needs to be taught. And you can even start teaching that again at something like circle time. You know, when you hear this song, that means clean up. What do we mean by clean up? Test for understanding first. Okay, some kids have a pretty good understanding, some don't. And then I'm going to pretend I'm going to put a bunch of toys on the carpet. I'm going to put this song on, and we're going to have to sort and organize into different boxes, for example. So that's how you would kind of set up and teach that routine, and then continuing to support and scaffold that routine, that big routine of cleaning up throughout your day. Okay, nap or rest time routines. Now, this is not a picture of napping, but this is a picture of exercising outside before having a rest routine. Depending on the age of your kids, where you're teaching at, you know, if you're really young preschool or in childcare, you might still have a nap time. Some of my kiddos, I did have a nap time during preschool because of their developmental, remember, we're talking about developmentally appropriate practice here. You know, they were ages 4 and 5, but developmentally they were 2 and under. So they still required a nap and or rest time. But getting kids outside can be really helpful in facilitating having some downtime. We all deserve rest, and children, especially if they're in your care for all day, deserve a rest. And so what does that look like? It's a calm atmosphere, promoting self-regulation through co-regulation. Teach them how to rest by you also resting with them, teaching those expectations. Do you have a plan for those kids who are difficult to settle? And what does that look like? Okay. And then again, the importance of movement and outdoor play to help facilitate this rest time. Okay. Our brains operate on a sine curve. Okay. And so if we're up here all the time learning, we're just going to facilitate a stress response versus dipping back down and having an opportunity to rest. This is also an homage in memory. This dog is Archie. He was our therapy dog, and he passed away in August. So RIP Archie, but he did some great work in my classroom over these 2 years. So as you can see here. I included this picture. So here we have the routine of having a meal, but in the back, so this was one of my classrooms, highly specialized classroom. And this year I had 5 kiddos, all of whom had medical and or developmental challenges that were quite severe. So we did nap in this classroom, and it was a very small room. So everything had to have like dual or triple purpose. So we got these gigantic bean bags. I can't even remember where, but the kiddos would fit right in them, so that it kind of created a little bit of this cocoon where then we could also add movement. So we could add a little bit of a jiggle and some pressure that allowed them to fall asleep. Every kid in this classroom also had some form of like disordered sleep. So we were also working on sleep training this year in this classroom. So you can also see the facilitation of like, we have a rocking chair, so we could do some rocking with the kids around regulation. In this back corner under the swing, we had a nice kind of padded cozy corner, so that also they could kind of cuddle up, they could sit in the swing. What you don't see here off to the other side is that we had a bank of windows, and I also had blackout curtains. And then when we would black out the curtains and turn off the regular lights, I would have kind of rope lighting, twinkle lighting. I had a fish tank that lit up. So I had lots of different ways to add in ambient lighting to provide that calm atmosphere. Okay. One more about nap and rest time. So environmental considerations and how to transition in and out. This was a big tent that we built one year. The bottom was the size of a queen size mattress, so the kiddos could kind of come in and out. That was a big duvet in there. It could also be a nice dark space. These gray curtains would close in the front. We had twinkle lights. Again, an opportunity to be restful during the day. Just the environment facilitated that. And then dismissal. A reminder that lining up is a learned behavior, and it involves body awareness, balance, proprioception, patience, lots of other things. Okay, so we have to teach our kids how to leave school, just like we teach them how to come in. Okay. Also, your dismissal routines are going to provide you that opportunity to communicate with parents or guardians if your children are being picked up, and then ensuring a positive end to your day. So how are you leaving these children in a good way? So that they're leaving you and sharing all the wonderful things that they're doing in your classroom. Okay. Again, this is just one more picture from one of my classrooms. You'll recognize the monsters over here. I've blanked out the names. That's what's under the blue pieces, but they would come in. That was one of our arrival routines, is that they would find their name and they would match it to their other name. That also served for attendance. In between those two things, I have this little table where the lamp is and stuff, and that's where I had my home communication books. I had a little whiteboard, this was kind of my information station, where a lot of my routines were kind of honed in on around gathering information, things like that. In these black boxes, those served as the kids' cubbies. Those are just regular fabric IKEA boxes that it would be light enough that they could take them down, all of their stuff fit in, their backpacks, everything, and then they could put them back up. So it allowed for agency and independence within those getting ready routines. And then this is obviously a mealtime here, where those routines would have been supported and facilitated there. Okay. So effective implementation, we need visuals, okay? So when we get stressed, our ability to listen actually gets less. So we need to have visual supports in place for routines and transitions. We need to model, we need to practice the expectations and what do these routines look like outside of when that routine is actually expected to take place. So we can practice lining up before we ever need to line up for a real good reason, okay? We need to be flexible. So how do we adapt these to meet different needs? And then we need to establish these routines and then have clear expectations and guidelines. Again, these all need to be taught explicitly for kids to be successful, okay? So when we're implementing these at circle time, for example, we welcome children into our room. We establish that the classroom is a community and we greet each other. What does that routine look like? And then we introduce any new materials that might be included in your visual schedule. Okay, it might be included in you're telling a new story for the day. Okay, and then check for understanding. Okay, and then review things. So review things like social rules and offer reminders to the group of what those expectations are. So one of the examples I came up with is a scavenger hunt. So can you reintroduce children to your classroom when you've made changes by doing something as simple as a scavenger hunt? So this is a tool that we use often, but if you had this where find all of these things in your classroom, and let's say, for example, you know, the letter station was a new thing. So when they're going around trying to find all of these things, most of these things are known to them, but the letter station was new, then, oh, Miss April, I noticed the letter station is new. So this is just an example of one of those ways that you can teach those routines, okay? We all know that this comes with some challenges, okay? So these are the main challenges that actually came up in the research that I looked at. Dealing with resistance and disruptions. So that's the I don't want to, okay? Looking at individual needs and differences and making sure we're getting those met. And then collaborating with colleagues and seeking support where, you know, this is one of the main tools of overcoming challenges, but sometimes we can feel like an island in our classrooms. And so remembering to reach out for support. So when we're looking to overcome that resistance, that actually takes relationship and trust. So if you don't have a good relationship with those kids in your classroom, they might resist you because they don't trust, like, you know, why are we doing this? Where are we going? So again, it by having your routines and your schedules established, it reduces that anxiety around trying to predict what's going on. Okay, so your relationship with your kids can be the most powerful piece of all of this. Okay. Addressing individual needs, that might look like chunking material into smaller bits, like we said, even like the cleanup routines, providing those visual supports, slowing things way down, and also doing less. Is there something in your schedule you can take out? Okay. And then collaboration. So we have to have clear and compassionate communication with the people we're working with. Those might be the assistants in our room, the therapists we're working with, other teachers in the school, and making sure that whatever we're doing when it comes to routines, it puts the children's needs and learning needs first, especially before our own. We can get stuck in that as teachers, okay? So that was a very quick and dirty introduction to effective preschool routines. And I hope that it kind of spurred some ideas for ways to grow and develop in your own classroom settings. And it may have even left you with more areas to explore or questions, which of course I welcome, in order to help us continue to learn, okay? Opportunity for any questions or comments. Again, this is my contact information, and feel free to email me if you have any questions, or also, more importantly, suggestions for future opportunities to learn together. And then I did have one more. I realized that we're just over time. But I just want to show you the Google Drive that I've put together that I will share the link with you guys. If you'll give me one more second of your time. I just want to find it here. Because there's this really great tool that I want to make sure that you have. So first and foremost, I'm going to put the link to share this in the chat. I'm just going to make sure that you all have access to it. Okay. Anyone with the link? Okay. Okay, so here's the link to my Google Drive that has these tools in it. And then, bear with me. So, okay. It's just bringing it up here. Sorry, I should have had that open beforehand. I had a client that ran late right before this, so my apologies for that. Okay, I'm going to share my screen one more time so you guys can see this awesome tool. Okay, so this tool, I found this, I can't remember who I would attribute it to, but this woman literally is a savior. She went through all the classroom routines and procedures, and this could really be for most grades, of how you do things, and then knowing like, how am I actually going to teach this in my classroom? What are the tools that I need to establish? So classroom basics, how do I come in? What to do when I enter? How do I hang up my coat, etc. Okay. Working procedures, how do I work in a group? How do I use table materials? Okay. How are children transitioned from one activity to another? Quiet time procedures. If you have quiet time, what does that look like in your classroom, and teaching that? Leaving the classroom. How do we leave the classroom? Meal time. How do I, sit at a meal? What are my, and this I actually pulled, this is something that we actually task our teachers to do at Aboriginal Head Start. So you'll see some things in here that are specific to our program, but you can also add or delete to this, right? So if you just like, if you want to use it, just save as and take it with you when you go and add to it. How do I use the toilet? How do I request going? How do I play on the playground? What do I do during free play? How do I leave the classroom? Okay. So I just wanted to make sure that you guys knew that this tool was in there. And then also, I see some of you have already clicked on the link, which is great. We've got some other different tools in here. This is a really great one just to share with either other teachers or parents about the importance of routines. Helping understand routines and schedules. Again, just another information package that might be helpful to other people and staff. These are a bunch of resources that I found that you might find helpful, that also I pulled some of the information from for the presentation. This is the flight curriculum that most of you will be familiar with. Making sense of sensory behavior. I added this in here because this might actually have some tools and routines that might help you when it comes to sensory stuff in your classroom, and adding in a sensory component to your routines. This is the junior kindergarten curriculum from the Northwest Territories. I just think that it's an excellent framework for working with little kids. They just present things in a really easy to know way. Indigenous early learning. So this is the Heckman curve. It just identifies how important it is to have early learning, effective early learning. Again, these are just some of the tools around, especially if you're advocating for some of these tools in your classroom. This was the outline that I used to develop the presentation today. So there might be just some topics in here that you might want to investigate further on your own. The slide deck is in there for your review. This classroom management plan is something that we've started using in Head Start, where it's meant to be a conversation starter between classroom staff of how are we actually going to manage our classroom. That's a conversation that doesn't happen often enough. And then the routines and procedures document that I shared with you. Okay, now I promise I'm done. We're 8 minutes over. So if anyone wants to either pop on and share anything or pop into the chat, I'm just checking the chat now. Stephanie took lots of note. The collection of routines in the slideshow, yes, so you have that in the Google Doc, in the Google Drive. Tanya, thank you for attending. I do hope to see you. I'm teaching lots on ERLC this year, so I'm focused on early learning, inclusive ed, and mental health are kind of my 3 areas that you will see presentations from me on. Lots more to come. And also, if you have any requests, please let me know. I would be happy to bring those to my team. Okay. Stephanie, enjoyed the real pictures. Yes, I wish I took more pictures of my classroom. If that's one other thing I can recommend, take pictures of your classroom. It's a really great way to review what worked and what didn't. I really wish that I took more, and I'm going to task myself at Head Start this year. We have 3 beautiful classrooms, so I'm going to try and take more examples to share in forums like this. You're welcome, Sandy. You're welcome, Lynn. You're welcome, Julie. There were not many ECE PD sessions. This was great. Yes, that is my main goal. John, who's our lead at ERLC, has tasked me with bringing more ECE sessions. So you will start to see more. Again, please let me know what you need so that I can either develop them myself or find the resources to do so. Okay, Nicole, thank you. Lots of notes. Love the child's agency and Indigenous teachings. Would love to incorporate this more this year. Yes, I'm going to hopefully work with Tammy, who's our other Indigenous lead here at ERLC, to provide some more sessions also on Indigenous classrooms. So look for that. Teacher behavior, routines, and predictability would be interesting. That's a whole, I think that would cross over really nicely with my mental health. I do a session on burnout too, which all of that kind of combines to how you're actually showing up mentally, emotionally in your classroom. Really important. Yes, and Reggio Emilia, Julie, thank you for mentioning that, is a great resource just in general around a philosophy towards early childhood practices for sure. Thank you for mentioning that, Julia. Okay, so we're at 5:10. We've gone a little bit over. Thank you so much for your time. I look forward to seeing you again at future sessions. Please feel free to reach out through my email or directly to ERLC with any recommendations for future ECE presentations so that I can make sure that we are meeting your needs, because that's what we're here for. So thank you so much, and I hope that you each have a wonderful evening. And I will stop the recording here.